Hey, folks. I'm the Amazing Vito, and I am beyond thrilled. I have the one and only Mr. Max Maven here with me tonight. Uh, Mr. Maven, thank you so much for gracing me with your presence. That means a lot. It really does.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here.
I want people to know right off the bat that uh, can I just call you Max?
Sure.
Okay. Uh, Max is a uh, very sweet guy. Um, he did something really nice. I was trying to get into. Well, I kind of told him that I have a problem with reading because I told him I wanna, and I hate telling people I'm dyslexic. So I asked him, uh, what would be a good book for me to pick up, and he actually took the time to reply to me and say, this is a good book for you to get the fundamentals of magic, and it's not gonna, overwhelm you. And so I was, you are an incredible. Look at the books behind you. I've never even read that. Maybe a quarter of that shelf at the bottom, the very bottom, like about that much. I've got dolls and stuff, and oh man,
Well, everybody has to find out what means enough to them to want to put it on the shelves behind them. That's what we're learning now in this era of pandemic and Zoom.
right?
Is You can sort of see a lot about a person's life by what appears in the frame.
That's no good. That's no good. All right. Well, not for me. For you, that's that I had I pictured in my mind what would he have behind him, and people have fake books. You ever see those the Zoom
Yes.
meetings, and
Yeah.
yeah, the person has like all these fake books that they never read. You could tell Max, he's either written or he's read those books. Uh, so real quick for those out there that do not know who Max Maven is, um, let me just I don't want to screw this up. Uh, uh, Max Maven is a magician and a mentalist, and he is ranked one of the greatest of all time in both categories. Okay, um, he's appeared in TV shows and produce. He's TV shows all around the world. I remember seeing in Canada. I remember seeing him in a show a long, long time ago that scared the first time I saw you. I remember I was with my grandmother, and he scared the living shit out of me. And it was just a fear, the way he looked, and just the way he moved and spoke. And it just I remember the fear, but it was that fear of behind the couch where you're like, this guy's past magic. He's like he's not this isn't he's from someplace else, you know. So yeah, he and Orson Welles, the great Orson Welles, called him uh, um, the most original thinkers in all of magic. And Orson Welles dabbled in magic too. And Muhammad Ali, I love Muhammad Ali, said, this man right here, he's dangerous. When you hear all these accolades and all that you've accomplished, I mean, I would be a pompous ass. I
Well,
mean,
I think there are quite a number of people who would say that I've achieved exactly that status. Um, but uh, the two quotes you just referenced are from people who I greatly admired myself, and held in just incredibly high respect and awe. Uh, both Muhammad Ali and Orson Welles were iconic, still are to this day, iconic and people who really transcend their fields. You know, Orson Welles was best known as a director of movies and secondarily as an actor and then many other things. But everyone around the world knows who he was. And the same for Ali, people who don't follow sports, who have no interest in boxing, but he was, when he was alive, it was said that he was literally the most famous person in the world. And so I think you would agree that both of those gentlemen were extraordinary, exceptional people, uh, far more so than I. And therefore, when they gave me endorsements of sorts, uh, I'm quite proud of that. Um, and but I think that in some ways, if there's anything that prevents me from being uh, fully a pompous ass, it's that I recognize my own status compared to that of an Orson Welles or a Muhammad Ali is much lower on the scale.
I don't know about that, Max. Eh, I mean, you people. Not only does Max write books, and he also speaks Japanese. Uh, I mean that uh, he's accomplished so much. He really has. He's accomplished so much in this day and age of media. You could look up this stuff and just sit there and go, the body of work, Penn and Teller, uh, Siegfried and Roy. He has helped out, helping out with their acts. He has done. I mean, he's the guy you go to. And can you uh, explain uh, what mentalism like here's what I think
Well,
mentalism is.
yeah,
Like you walking into a car dealership and getting a car.
well, that would be a, a useful branch of mentalism to be able to get that. Mentalism is a strange term because up until relatively recently, it was an industry term. So people in the field of mentalism, and by extension, the larger field of magic, knew the term mentalism, but to the average layperson, the average person outside of that world, uh, they didn't know what it meant. And I think most people, when they heard the term mentalism, figured it had some relationship to mental institutions or something like that, that it was something about mental health. Uh, so it's only within the last decade or so when there was a television series, a successful TV series called The Mentalist, that the public began to know what that term meant in the world of entertainment. Uh, I avoided using the term for many, many years simply because it wasn't a well understood term. Generally speaking, there are different people who would have different definitions for the term. My definition is simply it's any form of mysterious performance, entertainment performance, artistic performance, that has to do with the mind rather than physical mysteries. Uh, that's not a complete definition, but it does cover a wide range of things. So, for example, uh, by my definition, I would say that hypnotism as a theatrical enterprise falls under the umbrella of mentalism. Uh, Things like lightning calculation, memory demonstrations, those are a form of mentalism. And then there's the question of, is mentalism real? Is it real psychic phenomena, or is it purely theatrical? And I would say, well, the umbrella is big enough to encompass both and lots more. So it's not a very specific term, uh, but mentalist generally means someone in the mystery performance field, uh, but who's focusing on mental performances rather than physical. A magician typically would, cause something to appear or disappear, or destroy something and put it back together, or cause something to levitate, or, you know, change color, the various things that magicians do. And what makes mentalism its own category within that wider field is that it has to do with things that are focused on the human mind.
Hmm. And you could see that all went right through me. I mean, I'm as yes, yes. The way I know that you started off um, as a DJ because you have that beautiful voice. Um,
I wouldn't say I didn't start off as a
okay, that
DJ.
was one of your jobs.
Early in my adult life, I
You,
did spend some time as a disc jockey. Yes.
you have that voice. How, I mean, when you started off, how did you learn um, this skill? I mean, okay, here's an example. When I saw you one of the first times, um, it was uh, Jaja Gabor. I remember she was there,
Oh goodness.
and
Uh, I know exactly. I only worked with her once, so
she was
I know when you're talking about.
she
That
wasn't
was the
much help. She
that
I remember
was my first appearance on national television, national American television. That was the Merv Griffin show.
that's right.
That was way back in 1978,
Yeah,
and she was one of the guests on the show. So
yeah, she was a joy.
uh,
Uh, because I remember as a child going, you asking her just to hold something, and her saying, "Is this going to be long?" And you had, I, I mean, you were being so nice because I would say, "Jaja, just hold it for me, please." But I remember how you said something years later that I want to touch a little bit about where you because you had three envelopes, and one prize was $100 if you picked B. It was 100 if they picked C. It was $1,000, and if they picked A, it was just a free applause. And you kept saying, "Are you sure you want to change? You sure and he ended up picking the one, of course, the one with the applaud. And as a child, you're going, this guy has superpowers. And years later, this is what I don't get. Um, how do you guide somebody to get them to pick? You don't need to tell. I know that you don't need to, say, "Hey, this is exactly how I do it." But
right,
but how, if you were to say to me, "Vito, I want you to go up to that shelf and like the shelf behind me,
right, right.
and you write down
Yeah.
already."
Well, I mean, what we're talking about in this specific model is influencing a person's choice, influencing a person's behavior. And there are a number of different approaches to that. Uh, Obviously, a magician could just rig the results, but there are ways that you can steer a person's choice by the just and there are in fact scientific studies on such things. The order in which information is presented can affect the way that someone selects something. Just to give you a very simple example, uh, if I say to you, I want you to pick one of these four items at random, and then I show you four items, you are much more likely to go for one of the middle of the four than the first or the last. Because even though it's not true, we tend to think that the first one or the last one is less random than one from in the middle.
Right.
Uh, that's just how the human mind works. So people who want something to feel random are going to be more likely to go for one of the middle items. And knowing that I can use that sort of knowledge uh, to help with my guiding your choices.
Yeah, but that's an understatement because you could look like a complete and utter. fool if they pick the wrong thing.
Well, I've had that happen.
You've had that happen to
Well,
you?
sure, sure. The one thing that I find exhilarating, if you will, about my work is that there are real risks in what I do. Now, they're not the same risks that, let's say, if someone walking a tightrope has the risk of falling and potentially dying, my risk, if I fall off the metaphorical tightrope, the only thing that can be wounded is my pride. And I've had that happen. I've certainly been wrong. I've been wrong in front of massive audiences.
Really?
Sure.
Wow.
That's what keeps it exciting and interesting for me.
But what do you say when I usually cry a lot and just run off stage? Like,
Um,
what do
I
you
can't
do?
answer that because it depends on what that moment is, right? If something goes wrong uh, in an actual live performance, at that moment there may be a way I can salvage, right? There may be a solution, but it is likely to be a solution that I only realize exists then and there in that moment. And sometimes there is no solution. And then the question is, how do you acknowledge that you failed to the audience in such a way that they don't get angry or abusive? I've had the experience of failing where my genuine reaction has been to burst into laughter, not as a theatrical gimmick, but because I really found the moment funny. And the audience acknowledged, they realized that I was being honest in my reaction and laughed along with me rather than at me. Now, I'll say that I do what I do reasonably well, so I don't fail a lot. I don't, this isn't something that I have to deal with uh, every show. But yes, the possibility of failure is a genuine element within my work.
I didn't know that. I thought you um and yes, having uh, see, I had uh, 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 a guy show me some magic because I do stand up and just
Yeah.
do some silly magic
Hmm.
because I was bored and I wanted to have fun on stage, Max. You know, but it can be terrifying once um, I mean, the type of magic I do is ridiculous. Like it's child stuff. So, um, but it gets a laugh, and that's all that really matters.
Well, if that's your goal, then by all means, then you've succeeded.
Yes, but your level of it's just mind-boggling. You just sit there and go, how I remember you saying something like this, saying, um, like I you know, before COVID, you were allowed to bring people on stage, and I used to love having people on stage because you could play with them. Um, uh, but I've had to deal with where I've brought the wrong person on stage where they've had, too much to drink, or, it's a woman that wants to sabotage a show, just being very, not working with you on purpose.
Hmm.
And that can be, it's very odd because they always come up after the show going, I thought I was helping.
Yes,
And
I've had
isn't
that
that
experience.
odd? I thought I was helping you. And it's like, no,
Hmm.
you were actually, I'm taking 3 aspirins because of you, it's just, so how do you, I remember you saying something to this effect. You said, um, okay, if I'm dealing with a guy or a person that is not going to pick up the salt shaker, and I want him to pick up the salt shaker, and he's not going to, there's ways around that.
Yes, I've referred to what you're getting at as a cushion shot.
Yes,
In
like in
pool
pool.
or billiards, sometimes you can't hit the cue ball into the ball you want because there are other balls in the way. But if you are good at it, and I'm not a good billiards player, but those who are can look at the table and say, if I hit the cue ball on a diagonal so that it hits that cushion, that side of the table, that lip. It'll bounce off of that at a certain angle and then connect with the ball I'm trying to reach. So that's called a cushion shot. And there exist multiple cushion shots. If you've ever watched, you know, particularly the trick billiards demonstrators who set up these impossible shots, and sometimes it involves the ball uh, hitting one cushion and then hitting another cushion, and then on the third or fourth go around hitting the target. So that's sort of an analogy to what you can do sometimes if you're trying to steer a spectator. If you have several objects, let us say, and you want the spectator to pick the salt shaker in the example you just said, and so let's assume there are several items on a dinner table, and you want them to pick the salt shaker, but you get a sense that if you give them the cues to take the salt shaker, they may avoid that. They may sense where you're trying to steer them. So you can sometimes do a cushion shot where you'll deliver the cues that will nudge them toward picking up the fork, and they will, in order to be contrary, pick up the salt shaker.
Yeah.
So you've gotten to the results you wanted. You just didn't get there in that direct shot. You had to do sort of a cushion shot. That's the best analogy I can give to what you're talking about.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And it would be great if you could call that person up the next day at work and just go, "See, you were trying to ruin my show, huh? Got you right back, didn't I?"
Right. Well, I think what you just described, where the person said to you after the show, "I was trying to help you," I think that's the case more often than not. I think there are spectators who, sometimes because they may be drunk or on other substances, and sometimes because they're just unaware of the realities of performance, think that the idea is to just be wacky on stage. Because they just assume that that's what's desired by the performer. Most performers don't want a spectator to act up, but having said that, every performer who involves audience participation is alert to the possibility that a spectator may do something unexpected that turns out to be very good. Uh, I don't think most of the time when an audience participant doesn't do precisely what you ask them to do, I don't think that is usually the result of a malevolent intent. I don't think they're trying to mess the show up. Certainly there are spectators who do, but I think most of the time, either they're in some sort of a devil may care, let's have fun mode without thinking about the consequences. Um, or in some cases, they may just be nervous themselves. You know, being on stage is a lot of pressure for most people. Uh, and so sometimes people screw up just because they're nervous.
Yeah, I wish I had that. Most of the time I deal with idiots. So,
Well, there's that too.
um,
Part of that, I have to say, is on the performer. Uh, as a performer, you make choices. And one of the things in participatory performance is you look the audience over and find a person and say, that person seems like they'll be a good fit for the routine that I'm about to do.
right. The
And
drunken lady in the back who won't shut up, that's who I want. Bring her up
yeah,
here.
but if there's a drunk woman in the back who won't shut up, then I'm presuming you don't call on her.
Ugh,
Uh,
the luck that I've had.
well, every performer who gets audience participation has had the experience, and I've certainly had it many, many times, of assessing someone in the audience, saying they're the right person for this, getting them on stage, and it turns out they're absolutely the wrong person for it. But having said that, you learn by experience, you learn as you go. And I think your instincts improve over time. I still occasionally pick someone who I realize when they get on stage, I've made a bad choice. But I would say that happens far less often now than it did a few decades ago.
Right. So I have time. I got to stop playing certain clubs. Um, so, but I've seen people on okay, like comedy club is you're gonna have people there that are rowdy and want to have a good time,
Mhm.
and so it can be, especially the late show. You could have the just before the
Sure.
11 o'clock show. You could have people very, but I've seen where uh you bring people up and they're genuinely, there's two things I notice. They're a little bit scared. Okay, that's what I see. They're a
Mhm.
little scared, or they want to be super helpful, and
Well,
they keep saying I'm sorry. Like they'll go, oh, they'll if they're drawing a picture and you're not looking, you're not seeing them, they're constantly going, I'm sorry if you don't get this. I'm so sorry. Do you know what you understand what I'm.
yeah. I mean, first of all, I do. I, I, I very much understand what you're saying about late night comedy club audiences. I don't know if you know that for
Yes,
13 years that was
yes,
my primary work
yes.
was headlining comedy clubs in North America. So I've dealt with those late night audiences where pretty much everybody is drunk, and so
Oh,
you
they're a
don't have a
joy.
lot of you're trying to pick the least problematic spectator to be involved. Um, One of the things that I have done over the years is I've developed techniques. That's the wrong word because that makes it sound like it's something I could explain like it's a formula, and it's not. But I've developed instincts, let's put it that way, that allow me to uh, perform with a sense of authority that audience members tend not to want to go against. Uh, when you were in school, the teacher or the principal or the coach or whoever was in an authority position, for most kids, you would never even think of crossing that person. If they told you to do something, you pretty much did it. And uh, when I'm on stage, I want to have that same kind of authority that people aren't going to want to do other than what I tell them to do because it's my turf, it's my territory. That stage is where I work and they are my guests. And one of the ways I've talked about this in the past is I've used the expression "you don't wipe your hands on my drapes," and what I mean by that is if you were to come to my home as my guest and you washed your hands, technically speaking, you could wipe your hands dry by using the drapes on my windows. But it would never even occur to you to take that liberty to do that because it's my home, they're my drapes. You don't abuse my drapes by using them as towels as they weren't intended. It just wouldn't even cross your mind to do that. And I feel a similar situation exists on stage. That when I'm performing, my stage is my home. This is my place, and so it wouldn't occur to the audience member to do something out of line like that any more than it would occur to a guest in my home to dry his or her hands on my drapes.
Mhm. But see, it's your it's the way you are, Max, because I wouldn't mess with you. I mean,
Good.
I would just go, like I mean, he's not doing comedy. He's not. It's just the way you speak, the tone, uh,
Well, it's as I
the
say,
whole
it's
the whole
it's a
mood.
sense of authority.
Yes.
Um, But having said that, I realized there's something I should add, because when I gave the example of being a kid in school and the teacher or the principal or the coach tells you to do something, those are examples of authority, but frequently, not always, but frequently, the student, the child, doesn't like the principal or doesn't like the teacher. They do it because they feel the teacher has that authority. They don't do it because they like the teacher. I would hope, and with experience, I think I can say, audiences develop. Um, they, I think audiences usually decide that they like me, but even if they don't decide that they like me, they want to spend time with me. They don't look at me as an enemy or as a negative figure. So perhaps the example of a kid in school is not the ideal example for discussing this.
Well, I think back then, well, I know I look like a young man, but when I was in school, um, you did what your teacher told, or
Yeah,
I spent most of my time with the principal's office, and that was not fun.
I'll
So
bet.
it's a different time. I see my daughter's in high school now, and the way she speaks, I just go, in my day that would not work.
Yeah, well, the societal rules, as they always do, shift and change.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. And that's what I wanted to ask you, if you don't mind, your childhood. What I know I jump all over the place. I'm sorry.
All right.
Um, what was the best? I look at you and I go, what was fun for you as a kid? And I mean 10 and younger. What was you?
Yeah. Well, when I was below the age of 10, I had several things that were of great interest to me and that I pursued. One was magic. That was really, I started exploring the world of theatrical magic around the age of 7 or 8, right around there. But that was the same period of time when I jumped into music. I started taking piano lessons about that age. Uh, and it's also when I plunged into reading. Obviously, I learned to read a few years before that, but by the time I was hitting 7 or 8 is when I started reading for pleasure, when I could actually absorb a, a book that didn't have lots of pictures in it and what have you. So that became something I was passionate in. I was very fond of movies, which I still am to this day. Uh, and I think somewhere in those years leading up to being 10 was around the time that I started getting a sense of the vocabulary of cinema, although I wouldn't have thought of that phrase. But the idea that there are techniques involved in making a movie exciting or mysterious or funny. I think I began to become aware of that at a pretty young age. So those are the first things that come to mind. I liked certain types of graphic art and so forth. Um, what I wasn't interested in, and I had no interest in sports, and that continues to this day. I'm just pretty uninterested. I understand how the basic rules work for sports games, basketball, baseball, football, rugby, what have you. I understand the function of tennis or whatever, but I'm not interested in doing it and have very little interest in watching it.
Well, as a child, like, to me, I love hockey, right? To me, that was the Toronto Maple Leafs. I'm
Yep.
sorry. I know a lot of people in Montreal are going, you know, but to me, it was the Leafs. But and I'm a terrible skater, so that makes no sense. But I never understood people saying, I love the Cleveland Browns, and I was like, okay, are you from Cleveland? No. Do you know anybody from Cleveland? No. Do you play football? No. Why do you like the Browns? I just like the Browns. And I remember seeing going to the gym. And I remember these two guys talking about college football. And I just thought, this is insane. You guys are talking about something that I have zero interest in. I
Well,
don't understand.
but
Uh,
I think that's okay. I mean, I'm comfortable with the idea that not everybody has the same tastes and interests as I do.
yeah,
Um,
but
and
as
I
you get
get
older,
that sports in North America, I mean, essentially around the world, but particularly in North America, which is a culture I understand better than I do most cultures outside, people are rabid fans of different sports teams, different types of sports, and that's okay. I'm not, but that doesn't belittle what their excitement may be. I am not a fan. I'm a big music fan, generally speaking, but there's certain types of music that leave me cold. And it's not because they're bad, it's because they don't connect to me. I can listen to Italian opera and it just does nothing for me. I can appreciate the skill that is required to sing it. I can appreciate how elaborate the production values may be, uh, costuming, lighting, all of that. And yet it somehow just makes me shrug my shoulders and not be enthusiastic. But I certainly know people who feel quite the opposite,
yeah, I love
who
opera.
live for opera,
Yeah,
you know, and there's nothing, it's not that my taste is better or it's not it's not a competition. It's my tastes are in other types of music.
I think that like for me for music, um, whenever my mom would clean, she would play either Elvis or opera.
Hmm.
So as a little child, I would, I kind of go, oh, that's cool. Until one day my dad played the Beatles, and I thought, ooh, this is a different level. But the sports thing, yeah, okay, I like sports, but it's just not my younger days. It was all about, let's go team, let's go team. And as I get older, it's like, oh, they lost. Yeah, well, what are you gonna do? It's not like do or die anymore. It's not the like I see
Yeah.
people just lose their minds, and I just think
Yep.
you are wasting your time. Like just
There's now here you've said something with which I'll disagree, uh, and that's for you, and for that matter, for me. Most organized sports seems like a waste of time on a personal basis, but I would never say that to someone else. I would never say to the sports fan, "You're wasting your time." Devoting your attention and your
no,
excitement.
not make it so. I see guys cry. Like I saw a game the other, like they were showing fans crying, and I'm thinking that is just too far. If your team, if you're crying, maybe if you lost your house, if you
Yeah,
bet, then that's what I mean by that.
yeah. Well, I understand your point. I'm just not sure. I think it's a bad thing for an adult to get that wrapped up in a sports game, because I think people should. I would hope that most adults find things in their lives to get passionate about, and the ones who get passionate about sports, more power to them. But I hope the ones who don't find other things to be passionate about.
Yeah,
uh, Few things seem worse to me than a life in which you're passionate about nothing.
yeah, no, no, I understand. Um, when uh, you played the Playboy Club, how old were you, and what was that like?
Well, when I started my professional career, it was in the mid 1970s. So I was in my 20s, uh, early to mid 20s when I started. And the Playboy clubs were already on the decline. By the mid 70s, some of the clubs The Playboy clubs really peaked in the 1960s. And so by the 70s, they weren't as trendy or hip. They were starting to be looked at in some ways as being outdated. So some of the clubs were closing, but there was still a circuit of Playboy clubs. And so I got in on that uh, during the last decade of the Playboy clubs, or less than a decade. But I did get to work 4 or 5 different Playboy clubs, and most of them multiple times. And they were good venues. They were kind of cabaret setups, nicer than the comedy clubs that suddenly blossomed in the late 70s, most of which were pretty primitive in the way they were set up. The Playboy clubs were very, they were classy. There would be an actual stage. There would be at least some decent form of a lighting system for the stage. And this was also a situation where people would get dressed up. Comedy clubs came around at a time when people were starting to become more casual in how they behaved at night. And so you would get people showing up to comedy clubs in the late 70s, and this is true to this day, where, t-shirt and jeans, sneakers, whatever, nothing special about going to a comedy club. But the Playboy clubs, people would actually get dressed up in cocktail attire, as it used to be referred to. And so that was kind of nice. Uh, most of the Playboy clubs had there would be a musical band, usually 3 or perhaps 4 people, playing live music, something that we have much less of these days. Uh, and it wasn't uncommon that there would be an opening act, a singer or something. And it was like working in a real nightclub. So
Mhm.
I liked the Playboy clubs.
Oh yeah, I could imagine. I would too. But um, do you get nervous before going up on stage?
I don't. That's not necessarily a good thing. Uh, but I've never been particularly nervous about performing. I will sometimes build up some tension uh, as the adrenaline starts to kick in, and the
What do you mean build up some like get yourself psyched up?
yeah, just the adrenaline literally kicks in. The body starts producing adrenaline, and it makes you more alert and gives you more energy, and so that certainly happens before a performance. And if it's a major situation, then there may be more of that. But nervousness in the sense of doubting whether I'm going to succeed, nervousness about, you know, but gee, what if they don't like me, or I don't get that kind of nervousness, and I never have.
Hmm.
And that may be foolish, but it's just how I'm composed.
Yeah, man, I wish I had that. I'm usually,
But that varies wildly, and it's not particularly connected to the quality or skill one has as a performer. Uh, I'm reminded I don't, there was an actor named Edward G. Robinson. I don't know if you
yeah,
remember him,
I
but
know
he
that.
was a powerfully good actor who started in live theater, went on to success in movies, and for his entire life, apparently, I never met the man, but apparently for his entire career, anytime he had a public performance in front of a live audience, just before he went out on stage, he would vomit.
Yeah, yeah.
And that was just how he was put together, I guess. Um, Now, other actors, Edward G. Robinson was a very good actor, but he wasn't a good actor because he got so nervous that he vomited before he went on stage. He was a good actor, but he was a good actor. And what he had to go through to become that in that moment was his personal
Well,
voyage. Other actors who kind of never feel a moment's stress before walking out on stage have a different uh, uh, way of getting to the good result. But it isn't the pathway to get there is not what determines whether they're good or not.
yeah. I mean, I quit theater because of that. It was getting to the point where I get so nervous that live theater, I'd rather do stand up than live theater,
Mhm.
because the build up to go in front of a crowd with other actors, and half the time I'd be looking at the actor that I'm supposed to have dialogue with and looking at them going, wow, you're awesome. You know, you memorized all those lines and you didn't screw up. Oh, it's my turn. So it
Right.
was this, I hate, I would get so ill. Um,
Yeah. Well, the responsibilities of being part of an ensemble are just very different than the responsibilities if you are
yeah.
working a solo turn or a solo turn that involves audience participation. That's still very different than being part of an ensemble where if you stumble, you bring everybody into your
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah.
And that is a lot of responsibility. I haven't done a tremendous amount of acting, relatively speaking, but I've done a certain amount, both in my younger days in high school and college, but also I've done some acting on some uh, American
And
television shows, sitcoms, and
Canadian
so
shows.
forth.
You had your own show in Canada,
Yeah,
and you act.
but the Canadian show was, I mean, it was sort of a sitcom for kids, but I was so much the center of all that that it wasn't the same situation of thinking, oh, if I screw up, I mess up everyone else's work. I'm thinking more about I was a guest performer, guest actor on I guess the first one was
Mork and Mindy. Yeah.
Mork and Mindy, and before that, I was on General Hospital for a
Yeah.
couple of episodes
Yeah.
back when that was a hugely
Fresh Prince of Bel Air.
popular Fresh Prince of Bel Air, and on all of those because it wasn't all about me, and I wasn't the big, the big center of attention. There was this awareness: hey, if you screw this up, it's not just a reflection on you, but it's going to cause everybody else to have to you know adjust according to your screw up. So I understand that kind of pressure.
Mhm.
It's a different kind of pressure.
How was Robin Williams? Like, was
He was terrific. When I did Mork and Mindy, uh, he was uh, those were in his partying days. So in between rehearsal segments and things, we worked for a week to do that show. And he would frequently disappear because he'd been out partying the night before. So if someone wasn't keeping an eye on him, uh, suddenly someone would say, "Oh my God, now we've got to go find Robin," and they'd find that he was, taking a nap under a desk somewhere in the area, or something like that. So he was a little bit uh, absent at times. But having said that, when he was alert and engaged, he was really very funny and very nice. He had no particular reason to be nice to me. I was unknown and he didn't I was part of a bigger machine, this show. He could have been less I mean, we chatted, we had nice conversations. He didn't have to do that. So I found that to be a very nice thing, a very appealing thing.
Mhm.
To get that time. I spent most of that week. The person I really spent the most time with that week was Jonathan Winters,
Oh yeah, I love Jonathan.
because I grew up as a fan. I from before I was 10, from probably when I was around 8 or 9, is when I discovered Jonathan Winters through both television and record albums back in those days. And I had I think it was only one Jonathan Winters album, but I must have worn the grooves out listening to it so many times. And having the chance to hang out with this legendary guy whose comedy was just bountiful. I mean, he was always on. And I perhaps with most comics that would be tedious. But in the case of Jonathan Winters, you couldn't get upset that he was always on any more than you could get upset with a river for flowing.
Yeah,
It's just a natural thing.
they said he was the father of improv, and That's
Yeah,
what they
he
say.
was, I mean, arguments could be made as to who was technically the father of improv, but he was certainly uh, a remarkable improviser. And I'm not sure that there was anyone who had gone as far with it as Jonathan had, starting back in the 50s and 60s. Uh, and it was just extraordinary to watch him riff, to watch him play off of any given moment. You could literally hand him an object
Yeah,
and he could do 20 minutes with it.
yeah,
Uh, there are such people uh, in comedy. There are some people outside of comedy. There was a magician named Jack Channon, and Jack surfaced in the 40s or 50s. He was born in Russia, but he emigrated to the United States as a teenager. Uh, I first met Jack in the mid 1960s and knew him for a couple of decades. He died, I guess, in the 90s. Anyway, he was the greatest improvisational magician I ever encountered. Uh, you could hand him any object and he would immediately, without having to stop and think about it, he would do something magical with it. Whether you handed him a pencil or, a bag of peanuts. I mean, it didn't matter what the physical nature of the object was. He would do something magical with it at a moment's notice.
right.
It was pretty exciting to see.
I wish I saw it. I will look him up, and if you get a chance, look up Jonathan Winters. Whenever I'm feeling down, I watch Jonathan Winters, and I love him. Uh, he's a
Yeah,
wonderful.
he was something very special.
Is You've heard the expression of don't ever meet
Your heroes or
your
your idols.
heroes. Yes,
Yeah,
that's the
yeah,
one. Thank you,
yeah.
Max. You read my mind. Has that ever happened to you? You don't have to say names, but has that ever happened to where you've thought this person was going to be um,
Yes. The
right,
simple answer is yes. There are some celebrities uh, who I've met whose actual actual nature was different than the image they gave off.
right,
Uh, I won't name the name, but there was a very popular actor who who was known to be such a sweet person and such a generous person, and he was exactly the opposite. And I later came across some writing about him from some people who'd worked with him. And this was not unique to me. There were others who said, "Oh yeah, the nice part is a facade."
yeah,
But I'm happy to say that that's very much the exception. Uh, when you meet your heroes, they may be imperfect. Frequently we only get to see the best things about public figures, whether we're talking about celebrities in the world of magic per se, or mentalism, or in the general world of entertainment or politics or whatever it may be. It's not the same thing as seeing someone up close and personal, but it's in my experience, it's rare that it's a complete letdown. You might meet someone and say, oh, they have more flaws than I realize. They're not always what I imagined,
right.
but that they are something horribly disappointing, usually not.
Mhm.
It's happened a few times, but fortunately very few, because I think that's really depressing.
Yeah, it
The
is.
idea that there's someone you really look up to
Yeah,
and you're eager to meet them, and then it turns out they're just not anything like what you wanted.
I've had the opposite reaction where I thought the person was going to be fantastic, and they turned out to be a complete and utter fool. And then I tell there's people saying, "Oh, this person here. Oh, you got to watch out. You got to be careful. Don't do this in front of them. Don't
Mm.
do that." You know, and you meet them, and they're like the coolest, nicest. I'm just,
Yeah, well,
you know,
humans are humans. There's always the possibility that there may be someone who is your hero, or whatever word we want to use, and you meet them and they were having a bad day.
Right.
It may be someone who normally is the hero you imagined, but you met them, and the day you met them was the day they found out that a relative died, or that
Yeah.
a contract failed to go through, or whatever circumstance. They just may have been having a bad day, and famous
Or bad,
celebrities are allowed to have bad days just like the rest of us. So
or a bad decade.
I
Um,
suppose.
you said something that was really cool. Mysteries are made to be solved, but some mysteries are made to be savored.
Yeah. You left off the very first word of that quote. It starts with the word some. So in other words, some mysteries are meant to be solved,
Okay, yes, I'm
and
sorry.
some mysteries are meant to be savored. Yeah, the word mystery, unfortunately, uh, there are many words in the English language that have become corrupted over time, and uh, and one of those words is mystery, because it has become attached to, when someone says, I like to read mystery novels, they don't mean novels that are exploring the mysterious. I mean, they could, but what they usually mean is a detective story where someone is killed and the detective figures out who committed the crime, or how they stole the object from the museum, or whatever. uh, and I like that kind of mystery. That's fun. But when I say that I'm trying to perform mystery, that I'm trying to create mystery in a theatrical setting, I'm not talking about the equivalent of a murder mystery or detective novel. Um, but because the public in general, we tend to associate mystery with that idea that it gets wrapped up with a solution at the end. It kind of leads people into approaching a mystery performance as if it were a riddle or a puzzle where there's a clear-cut solution. Um, and that's not what I'm trying to do with my work. Uh, so that's why I came up with that statement, that there are mysteries uh, where the solution is kind of part of that process, but then there are mysteries that should be savored, which is to say, stop trying to figure it out. It's not the purpose, and that's not the best way to experience it.
Yeah, I think that's the downfall of that was the down for me personally. The downfall of wrestling was we all knew it was fake, but you kind of believed that that guy was crazy enough to hurt somebody. Okay, so they gave you the illusion of I could really hurt you if I wanted to. And my dad always said, like I remember saying to my dad, going, that guy got hit in the head like 15 times, and my dad said if he really hit that guy in the head 15 times, he'd be dead, son. But the the thing was that the performance, they didn't come out and say, we've got a bunch of writers here
uh,
and I'm going to pick you up, twirl you around, throw you up. You know what I mean? It's you've destroyed the mystery. So I've stopped watching. I don't, it doesn't do that for me. And there was that show that I interviewed the producer of the show years ago. Kurt um, Henning was on it. But they came to him and asked him if he wanted to do it, and it was where magicians, the guy shows how tricks are done.
oh, the masked magician.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I just thought, I don't want to see this. I don't want to
no,
know.
I agree. I found the masked magician specials back when they did them. Um, I didn't like them. Now, there were magicians who didn't like them and proclaimed that they were going to kill off magic. Uh, I said at the time I didn't think they were going to, and I think I've been proven right. But that doesn't mean that I liked them. I found them to be very mean-spirited,
Yeah,
uh, exposing ideas that weren't theirs to expose.
well, it's kind of
Uh,
saying, see, you
and
got
there was a really
fooled.
kind of
Yeah,
creepy attitude. Um, and unfortunately, uh, in many ways, magicians are responsible for the magicians are responsible for bad audiences in that there are magicians who are so adversarial in their performing style that they basically frame what they're doing as a challenge to the audience. See if you can figure this out. And that turns magic into puzzles
Mhm.
if it has that challenge mentality, if it has that adversarial quality. So much of the, the bad attitude that audiences sometimes have about mystery performance comes from the performers. So I think as performers, we should do better.
Oh, I was very, you're very nice man, very kind. Uh,
I, I
quick,
try.
quick story. I wanted to show Max um, a trick that I purchased, where it's a fish hook, and I thought he would love it, you know, and he said, "No, I'm not into you, people, anything that you could get hurt, not my thing." And I was just like, I wanted him to just, just go, yes, fantastic. But he, he spoke the truth, you know, and I think that's why people uh, have such high uh, revere for you, because you say it the way it is,
Well, I try to.
and that's what people want more than anything. They don't like yes men. Yes men are destroying the world.
Well, I think what we need in general terms is we need people who'll attempt to be honest with each other, at the same time being alert to the fact that honesty is not always the kindest thing. I'll wrap this up by mentioning someone who you may or may not have known, but you know of, a magician named Jerry Andrus. Does that ring any bells? Jerry was from Oregon, and he died 15 years ago or so. A remarkably creative magician, but who was very, very uh, well known among magicians that he refused to say anything that wasn't true. He was a stickler for this. So if he did a card trick, let's say, and he put the card in the middle of the deck, but then secretly got it to the top of the deck, at that moment, he wouldn't say the card is in the middle of the deck because that would literally not be true at the time he said it. So he would find a way to talk around it, but he wouldn't actually make the false statement. And that's a pretty odd approach to life, but he was just a real stickler for never lying. And I once had a conversation with him, and I did I kind of led him down a certain path, and I did the classic thing that I guess no one had ever broached to him. Let's imagine that you have a beloved elderly aunt, and someone has given her, or she has gone out and purchased a new hat, and it's an ugly hat. And you run into your aunt, and she says, "What do you think of my new hat?" And the true answer is, "I think the hat is ugly and it makes you look ridiculous." But that's going to crush her. That's going to hurt her feelings.
Right.
So morally, the better thing to do is to lie and say, "It's lovely. The hat is great. Aren't you lucky for having found it?" Um, so I said a few minutes ago that it is good if we try to be truthful with each other, but there are always choices. And sometimes there are choices where being truthful is not the best choice to make.
And could I ask one more, just one
Sure.
thing? Um, I know you love movies. Um, Now, if somebody were to, okay, uh, somebody to play you in a movie,
Oh,
who would you
yeah.
want it to be? And um, would it be like, all right, I wanted to have it to say comedy and a drama, but
Well, I think I can answer that pretty quickly. uh, and it covers both comedy and drama. Uh, because there was an actor who I first encountered when I was about 9 years old, that I first became aware of his work. And I wanted to be him. Uh, I never achieved that, but he was just a huge influence on me. And that was an actor named George Sanders, who you may not know of. He flourished in the 40s and 50s into the 60s. He died in the 70s. Um, he he was very urbane, very witty. He had a phenomenal delivery. He was a good looking man, but not, you wouldn't look at him and say, oh my God, he was so handsome. Uh, I didn't aspire to look like him. Uh, but I aspired to sound like him or to be like him. There was just something so sharp, and his timing was magnificent and his delivery was magnificent. He was in a lot of very good movies and easy to find. I'll bet if you go on to Netflix or Amazon or any of those and do a search for George Sanders, you'll find movies that he was in. And some of them will be serious, dramatic pieces, and some of them will be wittier comedy pieces and everything in between. So I guess I'm answering your question backwards because it's not who I would want to portray me, since George Sanders
He's
is no
gone.
longer alive. It's who was I? Who would I want to have portrayed? I guess is really more to that point. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, yeah, it does. Do you see any actor out that is like around now that you would you would say that could play you?
Hmm. What an interesting question. Um,
I've stumped
the
man.
the one that just came to mind, and it's not necessarily the perfect choice because it's not someone who's exactly like me, but who might be able to pull it off. Robert Downey Jr.,
Yeah,
an interesting actor. I
yeah,
mean, these days we think of him in terms of superheroes, uh, but he just does very interesting work. Has an interesting grasp on authority, on both serious drama and humor. He's not a bad looking guy. I'll go with Robert Downey Jr.
yeah. He was fantastic
That's a decent choice.
in Chaplin. He was fantastic.
Oh, he was astonishing in that. Yeah.
Well, I want to say I've got a million and one questions, and I know you're busy, but um, I want to say thank you.
My
Um,
pleasure.
you've been an absolute joy to talk to,
I
and
appreciate hearing that. And
I've I've watched you for many many years, and I hope to continue watching you for many many more years.
I hope so too.
Do you have anything um, uh, in the works, or any book that you? I know you write a lot. And
Yeah, I'm actually working on a couple of book projects that I can't reveal yet because I'm working on one book that will sum up the life of a magician, someone I knew who's no longer alive, but this will a person who at this time is largely forgotten, and this book is going to change that, I think. Um, but I can't really go into any details on that project. I've got a number of projects in the works. Obviously, the pandemic has put so much on hold, uh, but that doesn't mean that everything stops. So I am working on some projects, and I think the people who follow me on Twitter, uh, which where I'm at Real Max Maven,
uh,
and they get to hear what I'm up to. If I have any public performances, and I'm not doing much of that on Twitter, but I'm sorry, on the internet rather. but on the occasion that I'm doing a podcast or something, that's usually uh, where to find out about it.
Well, I'll put a link to Max's Twitter and
Okay.
his also his website. You could also purchase. There's he also sells tricks, the Penguin Magic.
Yeah, I don't sell them, but at this point, most of the stuff of mine that's for sale is available through Penguin Magic.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I'll put that all up. And I thank you so much, Max. I could talk to you for hours, and I could annoy you for hours. And thank you so much for this. It really means a
Sure thing.
lot. Uh,
Well, as the salutation has become more frequent, please stay safe, stay healthy, stay well.
thank you, folks. Subscribe. Be
Bye.
good. I'm the Amazing Vito.